Okay, a number of people had asked me to comment on the interview with David Icke done on London Real, and I thought I'd put in a little bit of information. I didn't watch the whole thing. I sat in the sauna last night and I listened to about, the first 30, 40 minutes of it, and so I'll comment on that part. First, I'm going to take a moment and discuss an interesting study that I was looking at last night. It's called The Associations Between Branched Chain Amino Acids Intake and Biomarkers of Adiposity and Cardiometabolic Health Factors, and Independent of Genetic Factors, a twin study. This is done in the International Journal of Cardiology in 2016. And, one of the thoughts, the results of the study show that people who are intaking higher amounts of dietary branched chain amino acids were associated independent of genetics. And this is where the twin study comes in play. One twin's taking a lot, one twin's taking a little. And those that were eating a greater amount of dietary branched chain amino acids were shown to have lower insulin resistance, lower markers of inflammation, lower blood pressure, lower adiposity. And this is something that, where do branched chain amino acids come from in the diet? Typically from animal sources. You can get it from some plant sources, particularly if you do like supplements that are, made to have higher BCAAs. But in general, animal foods, meat, milk, eggs, fish, will have higher amounts of branched chain amino acids. Those leucine, isoleucine, and valine, which are the branched chain amino acids, and they they are the ones that we see in these animal products, and so people eating a diet higher in branched chain amino acids, i.e., an animal-based protein diet, had better outcomes when we excluded twins. Now, there are studies out there that indicate if you have high levels of circulating branched chain amino acids in your blood, that is associated actually with insulin resistance and diabetic pathophysiology. But what is likely going on in that situation is that when we are insulin resistant, then the catabolic hormones, i.e. things like glucagon, tend to predominate with regard to effect. And thus you get a relative catabolism. And when catabolism is occurring on, you have muscle and protein breakdown. And so we see now these breakdown products, which will probably be these amino acids, which are circulating in the blood. And so it's reverse causality. Whereas many people will try to demonize animal foods, saying, elevated blood branched chain amino acids is associated with insulin resistance. Well, it's probably because we're breaking down our own tissues and not because we're consuming dietary amino acids. It's the same thing again with fat in the blood. And I'll say this over and over again. Fat in the blood is because of what happens in the liver. Carbon units, acetyl-CoA and other carbon units that come in through dietary sources, whether it's fat or carbohydrate, is then converted by the liver into saturated fats like palmitic acid, which circulate in the blood and then can lead to intramuscular accumulation of diacylglycerides, ceramides, particularly ceramides, which can be associated with insulin resistance. So again, it's not the dietary fat necessarily that we eat, the saturated fat that we eat, but is what is being converted by the liver. And that can come from fructose, it can come from carbohydrates, it can come from dietary fat, but doesn't necessarily show that. In fact, I published a study recently, or I put up a study recently the other day looking at the work by Volek and Finney showing that people eating more saturated fat actually had less of these saturated fats in the blood. So again, this is something that vegan doctors, plant-based advocates will say, saturated fat in the blood is bad and therefore it causes insulin resistance and therefore you shouldn't eat saturated fat. However, the true answer is it's what the liver is putting out that makes a difference there, and that can be impacted by fat and carbohydrate. Okay, so same thing with these branched chain amino acids, same sort of thing. All right, so David Icke is, I guess, and I had no idea who he was. I saw him because I was on Brian Rose's show, and I think, again, Brian is a really high-level interview. He gets some really interesting people on the show, and I was honored to be on that podcast with him, the London Real Show, back a while ago. But so David Icke apparently came on talking about the coronavirus a couple of weeks ago. It was overwhelmingly widely viewed, millions of viewers, and so Brian, being a smart guy, brought him back in to get more views for his channel, obviously. And apparently YouTube shut it down, but I saw it, and I didn't watch, like I said, didn't watch the whole thing. First, half hour, 40 minutes. And so just to put in perspective, David Icke apparently believes that there are some lizard people that control the world, or something like that. He's put this out there. So you've got to sort of question anything else out of his mouth after that. And so apparently in his hierarchy of world dominance, there's these lizard people at the top, and then these very wealthy, shadowy, sinister figures in the background, these multi-billionaires that are just under them, and then those guys control our current politicians, who are just kind of puppets that are being influenced and manipulated in the background, and then there's the rest of us schmucks below, somewhere below in there, right? And so this is the hierarchy he has. And so whenever you start talking about lizard people, credibility goes down a little bit, I got to say. So I did not watch the whole thing. I did not get into this 5G stuff. Maybe I'll watch that later and comment, perhaps. But what I did talk about, he opens up the interview and said, there is no coronavirus. Coronavirus doesn't exist. So that's a very inflammatory and controversial statement. And so he says that basically there's no actual virus, but it's just genetic material that has been isolated from people that have had exposure to different viruses over the years. And if you amplify it enough with PCR technique, you can show viral load in basically anybody. I mean, this is his sort of premise here. And he's saying that, while physicians and healthcare providers are not knowingly propagating this, they're complicit in, doing this by using this test, which doesn't really test for the virus, but test for genetic material that may be related to the virus. And so that is his theory there. And he said that, basically what they're doing is they're taking people that are sick and dying of any cause, and just testing them and saying, oh, well, they had genetic material and therefore it's coronavirus, and therefore we're going to inflate our numbers, and the normal amount of deaths we're just attributing more to coronavirus when there's no such thing. And so, again, is there any truth to that? I'm certainly not a viral expert. I'm not, looking at these tests and saying that. I will comment that there is, and again, like any good storyteller, and how much of this is complete rubbish, how much of it is true, I don't know, and I'm not going to speculate. But, when anybody tells a story, sometimes there's some truth in what they say. And, one of the things he talks about is diagnosis. And so I've got, just in my mail, because as a licensed physician, I'm still getting a lot of stuff on COVID-19 and coronavirus. And one of the things I just happened to see yesterday in my email was how to report deaths due to coronavirus. And this is a little thing that the New Mexico Medical Board sent me. And I'm assuming it's in line with what the CDC is recommending. And one of the things in there was interesting. I said, just reading through it, says, in cases where a definite diagnosis of COVID-19 cannot be made, but it is suspected or likely, example, the circumstances are compelling with a reasonable degree of certainty, it is acceptable to write COVID-19 on the death certificate as probable or presumed. In these instances, certifiers should use their best clinical judgment in determining if COVID-19 infection was likely. However, please note that testing for COVID-19 should be conducted whenever possible. And then they've got a example, and this is an 86-year-old female with an unconfirmed case of COVID-19. It says an 86-year-old female passes away at home. Her husband reported that she was non-ambulatory after suffering an ischemic stroke 3 years ago. He stated that 5 days prior, she developed a high fever and severe cough after being exposed to an ill family member who subsequently was diagnosed with COVID-19. Despite his urging, she refused to go to the hospital, even when her breathing became more labored and temperature escalated. She was unresponsive that morning, and her husband phoned the emergency medical service. Upon EMS arrival, the patient was pulseless and apneic. Her husband stated that he and his wife had advance directive and she cannot be resuscitated. After consulting with the medical man, she was pronounced dead and the coroner was notified. Although no testing was done, the coroner determined that the likely cause of death was COVID-19, given the patient's symptoms and exposure to an infected individual. Therefore, COVID-19 was reported on the lowest line used in Part 1. Her ischemic stroke was considered a factor that contributed to death, was not part of the direct causal sequence in Part 2, so it was reported in Part 2. So, there are, I guess, places for cause of death that, when there's no confirmed COVID-19 diagnosis that you can write COVID-19. So is that significantly impacting our death rate statistics? I have no idea. I don't know how frequently it's occurring. So maybe there's some truth to what he's saying in that regard, but do I think it's a grand conspiracy? I don't know how plausible that is, quite honestly. I do, however, and let me just show you some of the response we're seeing that I think we have to sort of wonder about. So listen to this video real quick, guys.
In most parts of the world, due to lockdown, most of the transmission that's actually happening in many countries now is happening in the household, at family level. In some senses, transmission has been taken off the streets and pushed back into family units. Now we need to go and look in families to find those people who may be sick and remove them and isolate them in a safe and dignified manner.
If you've observed recurring violations of the Safer at Home order, please continue to let us know at coronavirus.lacity.org/business violation. You know the old expression about snitches? Well, in this case, snitches get rewards. We want to thank you for turning folks in and making sure we are all safe.
So in that video, a fellow from the World Health Organization, a scientist, and I forget his name, is suggesting that because many of the infections are now, because we're quarantining people in the home and we're seeing cross-generational exposure, kids are infected and they're asymptomatic and they give it to mom and dad or grandma and grandpa, or the other way around, that now maybe what should be done is we should go into people's homes and then remove people that are either infected or sick and put them in isolation somewhere, presumably with other infected or sick people. And that's my, that's what this seems to be. And then there's a guy from LA talking about you need to snitch on people, kind of reminisces of kind of Nazi Germany, bringing the snitches back type of thing. But so the question becomes, well, let's talk about this taking people out of their home, and we talk about what is reasonable social actions to contain a presumptive pandemic where, you social distance, you have people wear masks, you close certain, businesses. And then when it becomes, what happens if, you get testing and your child tests positive but is asymptomatic? Does a child become removed from the home forcibly? What happens in that situation? What happens if grandma, tests positive and is asymptomatic, and you say, well, grandma, for your own good, we're going to take you out of this home so you don't expose the rest of the family. We're going to stick you in a place, with, other people maybe that might be infected and you might be exposed to greater viral load, or we're going to feed you a certain way, or we may not be able to take as good of care of you. We're going to isolate you. I mean, is that reasonable? Is that going to help? That I don't know. I mean, that's a line of civil liberties. It's a line of freedom. Is that a line we should cross? This sounds pretty pushing a line to me. Anyway, we'll see what you guys think about this stuff. Like I said, I didn't get into the 5G stuff. I know he talked about them. I heard that he talked about rationing meat or taking meat and making people eat the kibble, which I obviously disagree with. I think we need to strongly fight for our rights to be able to eat nourishing food, including meat, especially meat. Strange times we're living in, guys. Like I said, I'm going to continue fighting the good fight. I hope you guys support me at meatrx.com. I hope you guys come in there and check it out. Join for a month for free. We've got to, we can see where, this could potentially go. And I think we are all in it to fight back. We need to fight back. And it's not about defying safe practices around health, but at the same time, there has to be a line drawn at some point around freedoms, and particularly around dietary freedoms. And that's where I really am putting my emphasis. All right, you guys have a great day. I'm going to go train. Hope you guys are doing the same, and we'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.